So yes, I will present in English, and I will talk about Nietzsche's and Sartre's concept of responsibility. So I will start. So Sartre's existentialism, as well as existentialism in general, take shape in the context of what Nietzsche diagnosed as the death of God and European nihilism. Nietzsche is the first name mentioned in Sartre's Being and Nothingness in relation to abolishing the metaphysical dualism between being and appearance. And in situations 1, Sartre situates Nietzsche among existentialists like Jaspers and Heidegger, claiming that Nietzsche is an atheist who draws strongly and logically all the consequences from his atheism. Interestingly, in existentialism is humanism, Sartre asserts that it is precisely his own existentialism that draws all the consequences from the idea of the death of God. Thus, in this respect, Sartre identifies himself with Nietzsche, or at least they are unmistakably close to one another. And Sartre's existentialism has to be understood strictly in the context of Nietzsche's realm of thought. However, and on the other hand, Sartre certainly had ambivalent and to some degree perversive relation to Nietzsche. When asked in an interview whether he was influenced by Nietzsche during his studies, he answered, "I remember giving a seminar paper on him in Brunswick's class in my 3rd year at the École Normale. He interested me, like many others, but he never stood for anything particular in my eyes." End of quote. Perhaps one of the most important categories of existentialism, particularly for Kierkegaard and Sartre, is that of choice and responsibility. Hence, examining these concepts or categories in Nietzsche as well as Sartre, we should be able to get a more accurate understanding of the former's relation to existentialism, and specifically to Sartre's version of it. At first sight, it seems as though there is an insurmountable gap between these two thinkers in this respect. Nietzsche rarely writes about making choices and decisions, and in the overwhelming majority of his work, he undermines the concepts of choice, responsibility, free will, and subject. In Human All Too Human, and in a fairly rigorous manner, he puts forth the idea of an absolute irresponsibility, which he calls the most bitter drop that one has to swallow, and complements it with the insight of the innocence of becoming. So other presenters have already talked about it also a little. So in Human All Too Human 39, Nietzsche holds that no one, quote, "no one is responsible for his acts, no one for his nature. To charge is tantamount to being unjust. This applies as well when the individual charges himself." And Nietzsche concludes, "Therefore, man is to be made responsible for nothing, neither for his nature, nor his motives, nor his conduct, nor his acts." In the same book, Nietzsche also talks about unconditional necessity of all the actions and their absolute irresponsibility. Some very strong expressions. So Human All Too Human is, of course, a relatively early book by Nietzsche. So one might suspect that perhaps in his later writings, he gives up this idea of the absolute irresponsibility and innocence of becoming. But that is not the case at all. In Twilight of the Idols, he still believes that it is just an illusion to think that we or our will is responsible for our actions. He asserts likewise that the individual is a piece of fate, ein Stück Fatum, and that demanding from an individual change yourself means demanding that everything change, even retroactively. Hence, there is a continuity in Nietzsche's thought regarding the idea of the absolute irresponsibility. We cannot be held responsible for our actions and punished for who we are for the simple reason that we can't choose who we are. We can't choose our character. We are a piece of fate. We should, as Nietzsche expresses it, I think, very, very nicely, we should forgive ourselves our own I. So, verziehe dir, dein eigenes ich. When we turn to Sartre now, we notice immediately that in his existentialist period, and I would say till 1952, when he writes the book Communists and Peace, there Sartre's position clearly changes, but in his existentialist period, he had a diametrically opposite position. So I will focus on his well-known, obviously, text, Existentialism is Humanism. And I will do it for various reasons. First, this text is the only one which has the word existentialism in the title. And I'm actually quite surprised that nobody has dealt with this text during this conference before. It has been, of course, referred to, but nevertheless, in French. So I heard yesterday that one of Sartre's books was translated into German, which had also existentialism in the title. That was the question de la méthode. So, but in English, in French, the only book that has existentialism in the title, Sartre's book or text is Existentialism is Humanism. Secondly, I don't think that existentialism is humanism is a summary of being and nothingness, obviously not. It's rather a simplifying overview, however, not contradictory, concerning the concept of freedom. So, fourthly, so one could say that Sartre takes or is very critical towards his text later, so one could use that as an argument, but I don't think it matters because I think it clearly expresses his existentialist view. And when we look at some of the interviews that Sartre later gives, then he also takes back actually, or is very critical towards being a nothingness. So yes, so I'm focusing on this text for those reasons. So in Existentialism is Humanism, Sartre puts forth the famous idea that existence precedes essence, which on the other hand stemmed from the idea of the death of God. The argument is quite simple. Since there is no God to conceive something like a human essence, humans first exist. That is, they are first thrown into the world and create themselves, shape their own essence only post factum, by existing. Hence, Sartre asserts, quotation, man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself, yet he is nevertheless free. And from the moment that he is thrown into this world, he is responsible for everything he does. Notice that Sartre words it very strongly and blatantly that man is responsible for everything he does. A little later on, Sartre utters what he calls the first principle of existentialism. Sartre himself calls it the first principle of existentialism. I quote, "Man is not only that which he conceives himself to be, but that which he wills himself to be. And since he conceives of it for himself only after he exists, just as he wills himself to be after being thrown into existence, man is nothing other than what he makes of himself. This is the first principle of existentialism." Now, what is rather essential for Sartre is the thought that people have no right to make excuses for their misdeeds and unfortunate lives. there is nowhere to hide. They themselves have chosen what they are. He calls those who invent deterministic doctrines self-deceivers. They are merely the mauvaise foi. Thus, Nietzsche, according to Sartre, would be a self-deceiver, even the very worst kind, an absolute self-deceiver, who does not want to take responsibility for anything at all, putting forth, as he does, a doctrine of pure necessity and pure innocence. As was pointed out above, Sartre states about Nietzsche that he draws logically all the consequences from his atheism. Now, Sartre claimed about his own existentialism also that it draws all rigorous logical consequences from the death of God. So both draw rigorous logical consequences from the same ideas, but the consequences end up being very different, even opposite to one another. So what is happening here? Are there two different kinds of logics in play? Well, actually, Sartre seems to jump from one extreme, that we are created by God with a predetermined essence, which we are forced to realize in our existence, to another, similarly extreme position, that we are free to create ourselves and hence absolutely responsible. But from the fact that God is dead does not follow, even less rigorously and logically, the position that we are free to choose and create our own essence. There are obviously a number of things that can still determine us, even if one adopts the idea of the death of God. Nietzsche, for instance, points out language, culture, climate, heritage, physiology, etc. All of these things, to a varying degree, determine who we are and limit considerably our choices. Sartre just seems to express an ethical outcry, a call for responsibility, a plea to feel the burden of your decisions and take charge of your life. One should not blame anybody else but oneself for one's mistakes and failures in life. We might commend this kind of ethics, but it is no way a rigorous logical consequence. In his Marxist period, Sartre indeed recognizes and admits that human freedom is limited by various external factors. But does that mean that he approaches Nietzsche's praise of innocence? Probably not. Note here that Sartre and Nietzsche actually agree on the fact that one should not blame others for one's failures. Doing so would be ressentiment for Nietzsche and mauvaise foi for Sartre. However, according to Sartre, one should still blame oneself for one's failures, whereas for Nietzsche, one should forgive oneself, one's own ego, one's own self. In short, Sartre retains the ego or consciousness as a sort of final center of gravity, the last piece of God in man, as we might call it, whereas Nietzsche gives it up. Interestingly, Nietzsche, who advocates absolute irresponsibility and innocence of becoming, still keeps talking about freedom, great responsibility, große Verantwortung, and great decision, große Entscheidung, especially in his later works. He also talks about the willingness to great responsibilities of the new philosophers, the solitude of the highest responsibility. So how can he still do that, right? And what are the main differences from Sartre's notion? Firstly, the death of God is a source of freedom for Nietzsche as well. It's in the sense of new horizons opening up. As Nietzsche puts it, the horizon has become open once more. Every hazard is now permitted, and perhaps there has never been such an open sea before. But this freedom is not, of course, Sartre's freedom of choice. On the contrary, Nietzsche asserts that only by giving up the idea of the freedom of will and choice and fully accepting the necessity, we can reach the realm of freedom, das Reich der Freiheit, as he puts it in Human Not Human. Hence, Paradoxically, from the recognition of the depths of darkest and thickest necessity, the light of freedom may be born. Negatively, this freedom is freedom from guilt, remorse, and punishment. Looking for the guilty party, for someone to blame, even if you put the guilt on yourself, would still be a form of ressentiment. And positively, it's freedom to engage in adventures of knowledge never deemed acceptable before. And more importantly, to accept and affirm yourself, your own self, as it is, without the evil eye of moral preconceptions. In one of the Nachlassnotes, Nietzsche writes, "Wir arbeiten mit allen Kräften, uns von der Unfreiheit zu überzeugen, uns so frei vor uns selber zu fühlen, wie vor der Natur." Now, being free towards yourself, as towards nature, seems to mean that we put ourselves at the mercy of the necessity that we are, that we remain in a certain sense passive towards the forces bringing forth from the depths of our inside, without the feeling of guilt and bad conscience. The best formulation of this, of course, is become who you are. This freedom is not opposite to necessity, it is part of it. In Ecce, homo, Nietzsche writes, "Alles geschieht im höchsten Grade unfreiwillig, aber wie in einem Sturme von Freiheitsgefühl, von Unbedingtsein, von Macht, von Göttlichkeit." There are plenty of similar passages elsewhere as well, where he puts necessity and freedom together. So they are not opposite, they belong together. Now, it is worth noting that Nietzsche speaks here of the feeling of freedom, right? The Freiheitsgefühl. And he also often speaks about the feeling of responsibility, the consciousness of responsibility. So there is no abstract freedom that people supposedly have or not have. It all comes down to the feeling and consciousness of freedom. Now, this freedom is also the source of what Nietzsche calls the great responsibility. There is a quote, "Was ist Freiheit? Dass man den Willen zur Selbstverantwortlichkeit hat." But let me first just say in passing that the fact that according to Nietzsche, one opens oneself up to one's own, to the necessity that one is, that means that Nietzsche's conception of freedom and responsibility contains something of a passivity, right? So usually the traditional understanding of responsibility is that the subject is active, right? Takes actively responsibility, but it seems that in Nietzsche's case, he brings passivity into the concept of responsibility. And obviously one could connect it with later developments in post-structuralism like Levinas, Derrida, and so on. But obviously for sure there are differences as well. But yeah, so Nietzsche dismisses one notion of responsibility, the notion based on the feeling of guilt and remorse and understood as an activity of a free autonomous ego, say Sartrean notion to some degree, and develops another which is closely intertwined with this new notion of freedom. So freedom remains an essential part of responsibility, but not at all in the Sartrean sense. And obviously, this new notion of responsibility is also characterized by innocence. So in one of the quotations, it says, he uses, in that quotation, it's from Nachlass, so he uses both words, große Entscheidung und große Verantwortung. So, große Entscheidung, ob tauglich zur positiven Stellung, zum Bejahen. Kein Gott, kein Mensch mehr über mir. Der Instinkt des Schaffenden, der weiß, wo er die Hand anlegt. Die große Verantwortung und die Unschuld. So perhaps one important thing to point out also is that, as I already said, Nietzsche often speaks of the feeling of freedom and feeling of responsibility. Now, so it seems that Nietzsche is interested in something like a psychology or phenomenology of great responsibility. So to apply our notions of freedom and responsibility to fundamental metaphysical realm would be, as Nietzsche puts it, mythological. So how does this great responsibility arise? Firstly, Nietzsche applies this great responsibility to new philosophers, free spirits, etc. So it's not a matter of everybody, so according to Nietzsche. So if one becomes free towards oneself, opens oneself up to the necessity that one needs, liberates the instincts of creation from one's inside, he feels free, that he is powerful, self-assured, self-certain, godly, as Nietzsche puts it. And out of this self-assuredness, godliness, one feels and takes the great responsibility, and as Nietzsche sometimes says, for the future of mankind. So the more powerful the forces that spring forth from the inside, from one's inside, the bigger responsibilities one takes, right? And he writes, ist heute schon genug Stolz, Wagnis, Tapferkeit, Selbstgewissheit, Wille des Geistes, Wille zur Verantwortlichkeit, Freiheit des Willens vorhanden, das wirklich nunmehr auf Erden der Philosoph möglich ist. So let me. I think I have to start finishing. So let me just say one final thing. So Nietzsche and Sartre, although they share the starting point, seem to go quite separate ways in this respect. In his Marxist period, Sartre seems to come closer to Nietzsche. But with his new notion of responsibility and freedom, Nietzsche distances himself again and seems to come closer to some of the post-structuralist interpretations of responsibility. Thank you.